Okay, and if you'll remember, we've been doing a lot of talking about the servant, and we've talked a lot about Cyrus and the discussion before that. Now in 51, we're kind of going to we're going to see the Lord bringing comfort to Zion, to the city of God. And a lot of this is going to be a kind of an interesting conversation. There's some places where it's clear someone praying to God, and there's some times where God is responding. Okay. So it starts out like this. It says, "Listen to me, you who pursue righteousness, you who seek the Lord." Okay. "Look to the rock from which you were hewn, and to the quarry from which you were dug." So he's talking to the nation of Israel, and he's comparing them to a dressed stone. So like the stone you would use for building, a stone that's been shaped and made for a purpose. And that's kind of the picture that we're getting at. Now, part of the reason for that, though, is that at the end of chapter 50, there was a huge discussion about those that were not following God and those who had oppressed the people and what was going to happen. And it finally comes up at the end of it in verse 11. It says, "Behold, all who kindle a fire, who equip themselves with burning torches, walk by the light of your fire and by the torches that you have kindled. This you have from my hand. You shall lie down in torment." So to those that have tried to live by their own light instead of the light of God, it's not going to go well for you. And so now at the beginning of 51, "Listen to me, you who pursue righteousness." So now he's talking to the righteous ones. Okay. Verse 2, "Look to Abraham, your father, and to Sarah, who bore you." Okay. So that helps us understand that he's talking about Israel. Okay. Because they are the children of Abraham, the children of Sarah. "For he was but one when I called him, that I might bless him and multiply him." Okay, so see how we're kind of moving through the idea of explaining what's going on. So look to your father Abraham and to Sarah who bore you, because remember that Abraham was all by himself when I called him. And now he is the progenitor of this mighty nation of Israel that are my people. "For the Lord comforts Zion." Okay. Now remember that whenever we see the term Zion, we are speaking of the city of Jerusalem. It's the city of God, but it usually is discussing Jerusalem. "For the Lord comforts Zion. He comforts all of her waste places and makes her wilderness like Eden, her desert like the garden of the Lord. Joy and gladness will be found in her, thanksgiving in the voice of song." So part of this is a coming back from destruction. See, because he comforts all of her waste places. So she was in waste, and now she is being comforted and cared for and rebuilt. Okay. Now, this is an important element to the entire biblical narrative as we look at this. Notice that as God speaks of Jerusalem, that he speaks of it as her. Okay, there is a reason for this, and it is important that we kind of get this. Israel, and particularly Jerusalem, the city of peace, is what that means. Okay, is considered, and it's Israel as a whole, but Jerusalem is an example for this. And then for us later, it comes to this. In the end of Revelation, remember that the very last chapter of Revelation says that the new Jerusalem comes. And it terms it this way: it's adorned like a bride on her wedding day. Okay, so this is a place, but it is a picture of the bride of God. Okay, so this is part of this idea. He's comforting her waste places. He's making her wilderness like the Garden of Eden. He is now taking care of her, and he is building her into something beautiful for him. Okay, When we look at the Old Testament and the New Testament, there's two particular places that we look. In Hosea, okay, remember there is a large analogy that God uses in the book of Hosea. And one of the things he says is he tells Hosea, I want you to go find an unfaithful wife, is basically what he says. He says a wife out of prostitution. Okay. But an unfaithful wife. Okay. And he says, I want you to marry her. And as you marry her, then she is going to be a picture of what Israel is to me. Israel is my bride. She is my wife, but she has been unfaithful. Okay. One of the reasons that we get into this is because this builds the picture here that there are two sins in the Bible, one spiritual and one between two people, that are synonymous in the way they're pictured in the Bible, and that's idolatry and adultery. Okay, so adultery is between two people, two people who have covenanted together in marriage. Okay, and when one of them is unfaithful, or both of them are unfaithful, or however you want to look at that, that is adultery. We are in a covenant relationship with God, same as a marriage covenant. When we search after other gods, we commit what the Bible calls idolatry, but it is the same idea. We are, and the Bible several times gives it this kind of term. We are, and I'm going to use the exact biblical term, we are whoring ourselves when we seek after other gods. Why? Because we are in a covenantal relationship with the Heavenly Father. He is our husband, right? We are, as Christians, we're the bride of Christ. But Israel was considered to be the bride of the Father through much of the Old Testament. Well, when they went off searching after other gods, they were prostituting themselves, which explains in many ways God's hatred of the practice. Because when they went out and chased after other idols, they were stepping out on the relationship that God had wanted to have with them. And so there is actually a place, and I would have to look it up. I think it's in Jeremiah. It may be later in Isaiah. But there's a discussion where it says that when Israel was born, I took care of you. I brought you out of you were basically cast away, and I brought you back. And I took care of you. And then he says, then later I came, and now you were old enough to be wed. You were old enough to love. And I married you. And I put you in fine dresses, and I did all these things for you as your husband. And then you stepped out on me. And that's exactly the picture that is brought forward. And he's saying, well, because you've done that, now I've got to punish you. Okay. But the same thing is true here. The picture that God is getting is the Lord is going to comfort Zion like a husband comforts his bride. She's been broken and battered and bruised, and now he's taking her and bringing her into his home and making her part of his family. And the waste places, the places that have come into disrepair, are going to be repaired. The places that were wilderness and had no inhabitants are going to become like the garden of God. And joy and gladness is going to be found in her, thanksgiving in the voice of song. Why? Because now she has a husband who will take care of her. That is certainly a part of this idea, is that God is stepping in and he is treating her like his beloved and taking care of her. Okay, then it goes on in verse 4 and it says, give attention to me, my people, and give ear to me, my nation. For a law will go out from me, and I will set my justice for a light to the people. Yes. Okay, my people, my nation. Okay. For a law will go out from me. I will set my justice for a light to the peoples. My righteousness draws near. My salvation has gone out, and my arms will judge the peoples. So he's saying, look at my authority is I'm going to be the judge. I'm going to be the one who determines. I am going to bring justice. I'm going to bring righteousness. Okay. The coastlands hope for me, and for my arm they wait. So even the coasts hope that I will come and that I will stretch out my arm to them. Lift up your eyes to the heavens and look at the earth beneath, for the heavens will vanish like smoke, the earth will wear out like a garment, and those who dwell in it will die in like manner. But my salvation will be forever, and my righteousness will never be dismayed. So here's what it's saying. He goes, so look to the heavens that you think are permanent. Look to the earth that you think is permanent. It's all going to go, but my salvation will never go away, and my righteousness will never be challenged. Listen to me, verse 7. Listen to me, you who know righteousness, the people in whose heart is my law. So once again, listen to me, those of you who are doing right by me and who are following me. Fear not the reproach of man, nor be dismayed at their revilings. So we see this more in the New Testament when we look at the Beatitudes, and it says, blessed are you when people harass you and make fun of you and treat you badly because you're following me. Okay. But what is he saying? Well, if other people don't like you because you're being righteous, then don't worry about it. Why? The moth will eat them up like a garment, and the worm will eat them up like wool. They will eventually be destroyed. Their hatred of you will not be permanent. Okay, but also the idea is their reviling will not be permanent. Why? Because eventually judgment comes. See, it's one of those things. I once heard a guy say it this way: you can only be an atheist in this life. No one is an atheist after they die. Why? Because they meet God.
They should.
Okay. But here's the thing. They can spend their whole life reviling people who are followers of God. But eventually, the moth eats their garments and the worms eat their body. Eventually, they die. But my righteousness will be forever, and my salvation to all generations. Their reviling is temporary, but my salvation and my righteousness are permanent. See, God is building this idea that the reason that, and really it is an idea this way, the reason that you should stand firm for God, those of you who are still standing firm, the reason that you shouldn't abandon that is because all the things that you can get apart from me are going to eventually go away. But I'm permanent. There's no end for me. See, the New Testament brings up the same thing. Remember, it says, don't lay up your treasures here, because why? The moth eats it, the worm eats it, the thief steals it, the whatever, the rust takes it, right? It all eventually becomes worthless. Okay. But the word of the Lord lasts forever. But God's love, God's mercy, God's grace, all of those things are permanent. They're never ending. And so stick with what's going to last. Then in verse 9, we have a little bit of an interesting discussion here. And we will get to all of it here in just a moment. It says, Awake, awake, put on strength, O arm of the Lord. Awake as in days of old, the generations of long ago. Okay, was it not you who cut Rahab in pieces and who pierced the dragon? Okay, so we're going to dig into this just for a moment. So there are some scholars who believe that these two particular acts that are mentioned here are speaking of ancient mythology. Now, here's the issue. Okay, if that were the case, then it would kind of be like connecting God to an idol, because it would be, the old Babylonian gods doing things. What looks far more likely is Rahab. Now, remember, we have the name Rahab in the Bible. That's not who it's talking about, mainly because we know she wasn't cut in pieces. Okay. Rahab is often connected to the land of Egypt. In fact, one of the discussions is in the day that this would have been written, that would have been the name of the people who controlled Egypt. Okay. So what is God doing? Well, he is going back and looking at the Exodus. Okay. Weren't oh God, awake, put on strength, awake as you did in the days of old. Weren't you the one who cut Egypt into pieces? And who pierced the dragon that was Egypt. Egypt was the power of the day. They pierced the dragon. To go in and make that a little more of understanding, verse 10 kind of solidifies that as the issue. Was it not you who dried up the sea, the waters of the great deep, who made the depths of the sea a way for the redeemed to pass over? Well, what is he talking about? He's talking about the parting of the Red Sea. So notice what this is. This is moved. Okay, verses 1 through 8 are God speaking. Verse 9 is a prayer to God. Awake, awake, put on strength, O arm of the Lord. Now remember that this idea of the arm of the Lord, all the way back in Exodus, we see this moment as he is speaking to Moses, and he says, I will stretch out my arm. Okay, the arm is that by which God acts. That doesn't mean literally his arm, but I mean, the idea is that it is by stretching out his proverbial arm that God acts. And so the prophet or the speaker here is saying, wake up, O arm of the Lord. We have not seen you act in a while, and we want you to move. Awake as in days of old, the generations of long ago. So as we look at now, all that we're going through, we're looking back at the Exodus and saying, could you please move like that again? Where you destroyed Egypt, where you took this mighty nation that had enslaved us and you basically wrecked them. And then you dried up the sea and you allowed us a way over because what? And notice the word, for the redeemed to pass over. Well, what does that mean? For the ones you purchased. And remember that the entire discussion of the Exodus is that God, through his mighty acts and his mighty deeds, are buying them out of their slavery. The idea that is so powerful in all of this, and is certainly something that we need to understand in the context of the difference in the Old and the New Testament, is that one of the things that's very much the same that we don't often realize is the order in which God works. Okay, so in the New Testament, we would tell anyone that Christ on the cross redeemed us. Right? And then after our redemption, after our coming to him, after we have been redeemed from our sin, Then God says, now here, as my redeemed one, here is how I want you to live. Okay. The idea of a lifestyle, of a way of pleasing God, comes after the redemptive work. It's not, now you follow my rules, and if you follow my rules well enough, then I'll take care of you. It's, I'm going to take care of you now in response to me taking care of you. Now here's how I want you to live. Well, while we often miss it, the order in the Old Testament is exactly the same. He redeems them out of their slavery in Egypt. Right? They're slaves. They have no hope. And God goes, now watch this. And with his mighty arm, he frees them out of captivity. And it is at the beginning of their freedom that God says, now that you are free and you are my people and I have set you free, I have redeemed you. Here is how I want you to live so that you might please me. The order is the same. In fact, when you look at Exodus chapter 20 and the Ten Commandments, the first thing you see is, I am the Lord who redeemed you out of the land of Egypt. That's the picture. I bought you out of the land of Egypt. I redeemed you. I brought you out. I freed you from your slavery. Now, here are the rules that you need to live by. Not so that I will redeem you, but because I redeemed you. Here's the way that you please me. Okay. Now, what did they do? They went every way other than that.
It's the same word we're all in trouble with.
Okay. But here's the beautiful picture. So what it says is, and really it is very much like a relationship in all of this. God, through the entire thing, is always faithful. Okay, but the children of Israel stray. So he says, well, you've strayed. You're no longer living to please me. Now, in order to wake you up so that you'll come back, I'm going to send something to wake you up. So he sends a calamity, he sends a plague or whatever, right? And 9 times out of 10, when a really bad plague came before they came into the promised land, do you know what it was? We'd like to go back to Egypt. We really wish you hadn't redeemed us, is really what they're telling God. And so God goes, well, let me give you a picture of what it looks like if I hadn't redeemed you. And he sends a plague. And then they go, oh, okay, no, we really do want you to. Okay. And we go forward all the way through the life of Moses and into the life of Joshua and the taking of the land. Okay. And then finally, at the end of Joshua, what we looked at a week ago, Joshua, at the end of it, he says, so you need to make a choice. You can choose to serve the God who redeemed you, or you can choose to serve the gods back in Egypt or the gods in this new land, but you need to make a choice. See, but the choice is very simple. It's the God who bought you out of all that garbage, who bought you out of all of that, or you can go back to it. Now, in the New Testament, the Jesus kind of phrases it this way. It's like a dog going back to his own vomit.
That's terrible.
Okay. So the dog gets into something so bad that he throws up, and then he decides to go back and eat that, which they do.
Yeah, they do. That's what I said.
Okay. But that is what God is equating this to. Now we go back to Hosea, and remember, this is exactly what God has Hosea kind of example. Okay. He says, go and marry this woman who's going to be unfaithful to you. She's a harlot. She's a prostitute. Go and marry her. And they have 3 kids. In Hosea, the first kid, and she bore me a son, and I named him Jezreel. Okay. Then the second one, she bore another son, It does not say she bore me a son. And Hosea, at the Lord's guiding, names him not my people.
Name's the second son then.
Yeah. Okay, not my people. And God goes, because you have, and he phrases it this way, because you've poured yourself out and you are no longer my people because you have not been faithful. But it's very clear in the context of Hosea that child number 2 is not Hosea's. And then the third one is a daughter. And once again, it may be backwards on which one's son and which one's daughter. It may be the daughter's not my people. And I don't remember for sure. But however, it's a son and a daughter. And once again, doesn't say she bore Hosea a daughter. It just says she had a daughter. And this one, he calls her no mercy. And God goes, because I'm not going to have any mercy on you because of the way you've lived. Okay. Then we go forward and we get into a kind of a long diatribe about God and the children of Israel and their unfaithfulness and all that. And suddenly, a couple chapters later, it comes back to Hosea's story. And he says, but God tells him, okay, now go back and get your wife. And he says it this way. He says, go back and get your wife. And he buys her off the prostitution block. She has left, clearly she has left him. And she has destroyed her life, and now she is about to be sold in a slave auction. And he goes in and he buys her at the slave auction. And he buys her and he brings her back and he says, okay, from now on, you're going to be mine. You're not going to go running off anymore. You hear me? And then as we go a little further in Hosea, then suddenly it says, so remember that now in this new covenant I'm going to make when I come back and retrieve you, the one who used to be called not my people will now be called my people, and the one who was called no mercy will now receive mercy. So the movement of God in much of the Old Testament and much of the New Testament, culminating when we get to the end, is this, that God has been actively pursuing a people that have rejected him. And there will come a point, but when it's all said and done, when he will buy them back. Well, the first picture of that is Jesus, right? His death, burial, and resurrection is a purchasing. In fact, while it's not an exact discussion of this idea, but the price for which he buys Gomer, which was the name of his wife, is 30 pieces of silver, which is the same price that is mentioned in the Bible for what Judas sold him for. Okay. Now, the coinage is not the most important thing, but the thing that we're dealing with is that what is going on is that as Jesus dies, he has bought back that which has been unfaithful. Now, we have a period of time where unfaithful Israel continues, and we have the movement into the church age where we have majoritively a Gentile faith. Now, I believe there will come a point, and the Bible indicates this, that God will come back and he will redeem the Jews. He will redeem the children of Israel, and it makes a big discussion. They will look upon him who they pierced, and they will mourn and weep because they will realize they missed their Messiah. They missed their Savior. But over and over again in that context throughout the Old Testament, when it talks about that, it usually then comes to the point where it says, now you've been brought back to life. Ezekiel and the dry bones story. I'm going to breathe into these dry bones and they're going to come back to life. And then he goes, I'm going to put a new heart in you, and you're no longer going to have to get somebody to teach you about God because you're going to know me. And it says, you will be my people and I will be your God. Well, notice the idea. It's not the same phrasing, but the picture that is being on. You will be my bride and I will be your husband. and no more will you run away. So the redemptive work of God is a pursuing of unfaithful people. The entirety of the Bible is about God pursuing us when we were running away. If you really want to look at it, it is such a powerful, and I'm going to use the word romantic story of a bride who has chosen that she doesn't want to stick around, and he chases her to finally win her back. And that is very much the discussion. So we have this prayer. As it happened in Egypt, then redeem. Okay. And the ransom to the Lord shall return and come to Zion with singing. So now here's the idea. The ones who the Lord ransomed out of their slavery will return to the city of God, and they will be singing, and they'll have everlasting joy upon their heads, and they shall obtain gladness and joy, and sorrow and sighing shall flee away. So awake, O God, and show us what you did in Egypt, so that those that you have ransomed, and there are several places in history where you see this, certainly coming back from the exile would have been one of these. But really, the final understanding is whenever we come to the new heaven and the new earth, that we'll come with joy and gladness because sorrow will be over. Because God has finally moved. Okay, now we come back to God's conversation. I am he who comforts you. Who are you that are afraid of man who dies? So if I, the infinite, all-powerful, almighty, eternal God, am the one who comforts you, then why are you afraid of some person? Why do you fear man? Of the Son of Man who is made like grass. Right? How long does it take grass to die? Not very long. Not around here. And have you forgotten the Lord your Maker, who stretched out the heavens and laid the foundations of the earth? And you fear continually all the day because of the wrath of the oppressor when he sets himself to destroy? So he goes, have you forgotten? Now, remember when we went through Deuteronomy, what was the primary word of the entire book of Deuteronomy as we talked about it? Remember, or don't forget. Okay, don't forget the Lord. Make sure you remember the Lord. Make sure you remember what God has done. Make sure you remember what he's told you. Make sure you remember he's with you. Make sure you remember. Don't forget, don't forget, don't forget. Okay, and now here in Isaiah, have you forgotten the Lord your Maker? Who stretched out the heavens and laid the foundations of the earth? Don't you remember that God made all of this? And yet you are continually afraid of some guy who's oppressing you and trying to set himself up to destroy. And then he says that, and where is the wrath of the oppressor? He who is bowed down shall speedily be released. He shall not die and go down to the pit, neither shall his bread be lacking. So we're talking about a time where God finally moves, and all those who were oppressed and all those who were beaten down will be freed, and they'll be fed, and they'll be doing well. And then verse 15, I am the Lord your God, who stirs up the sea so that its waves roar. The Lord of hosts, remember that means the Lord of the armies of heaven is his name. And I have put my words in your mouth and covered you in the shadow of my hand, establishing the heavens and laying the foundations of the earth, and saying to Zion, you are mine. You are my people. You're mine. Wake yourself, wake yourself. Stand up, O Jerusalem, you who have drunk from the hand of the Lord, the cup of his wrath, who have drunk to the dredge the bowl, the cup of staggering. Okay, so now here's the thing. This is the picture. Okay. Now God is saying, wake yourself, stand up, O Jerusalem, who have drunk the wine of the wrath of God. Who it's literally this idea of a person who has drank themselves into a stupor. But the wine they've drank is the wrath of God. Why? Because of their idolatry, because of their brokenness, because they were not following God. And so God has poured upon them a wine, the cup of staggering, a wine full of his wrath. And they have, remember that drunkenness means to be completely filled. Okay, in the New Testament, do not be drunk with wine, but be filled with the Holy Spirit. The two words are synonymous. Don't be filled with wine, but be filled with the Holy Spirit. Okay, but they have been filled. And notice, they drank all the way to the last drop, the dregs. The bowl, the cup of staggering. And then it says, there's none to guide her among all the sons she is born, and there is none to take her by the hand amongst all the sons she's brought up. These two things have happened to you. Who will console you? Devastation and destruction, famine and sword. Who will comfort you? Your sons have fainted. They lie at the head of every street like an antelope in a net. They are full of the wrath of God, the rebuke of your God. Then verse 21, therefore hear this, you who are afflicted. Okay, so he's telling them to wake up because they have completely forsaken the Lord and they have received the punishment due. Okay, now therefore hear this, you who are afflicted, who are drunk, but not with wine. Okay, see, we're still in this idea. Thus says your Lord, the Lord. Okay, thus says your King, the Lord. Your God who pleads the cause of his people. Behold, I have taken from your hand the cup of staggering. The bowl of my wrath you shall drink no more. Okay, so here is the beautiful picture here. My punishment of you has now ended. Hear this, you who are drunk on my wrath, who have been filled with my wrath for all these years. Behold, I have taken from your hand the cup of staggering, and the bowl of my wrath you will not drink anymore. I am through punishing you. And I will put it into the hand of your tormentors who have said to you, bow down that we may pass over, and have made your back like the ground and like the streets for them to pass over. So here is the picture that ends chapter 51. The Lord says, yes, I know that you're looking at this and going, we have been in punishment for a long time. And it feels like you are not hearing us, that you are not moving, that you are not working, right? Awake, awake, O Lord, and show us your power. And God's response is, so hear this from me, your King, the Lord of hosts. I'm done punishing you now. And I'm going to take that cup that I gave you that caused you to stagger, that caused you to fall, that caused you to be in agony and punishment and torment. And I'm going to take it out of your hand so that you don't drink it anymore. And I'm going to put it in the hand of the one who's been oppressing you. The one who's made you bow down and been walking all over you. That's literally how it's phrased, right? Who said, now bow down so that we can pass over. Get down on your knees so we can walk on your back.
Does that mean the cup's being given to the devil?
No. In this case, it's the one who has been the instrument of their punishment. So, for example, Babylon, okay, would be one example of that. Or Rome later. Or in the final discussion, the Antichrist and all of that. The ones who have been punishing you, I am going to now move and punish them in turn. Okay. It's not speaking specifically of the devil, it's speaking specifically of the nations that have.
That the devil's using.
Yes. Okay. Revelation goes back into detail on this, and it mentions a discussion of a group of kings. Okay. And it says that, I think it says that this 5 were, one is, and one is yet to. Okay. I have to remember exactly how it works, but the numbering works this way. Okay. And I think it's 4 were, one is, one will come but won't last long, and then the last one is the kingdom of the Antichrist and his kingdom. Okay. And when you look at it and you look at the Old Testament and the punishment of Israel, you get that the 4 that were Assyria, Babylon, the Medo-Persians, and the Greeks. Okay, that's 4. Then the 5th one is Rome, which was at the time of the writing. Okay, then you can make a case, and this is just making a case, that the 6th one that it says it will come and be fierce, but it won't last long, would be the Third Reich or Nazi Germany. Okay, and the Holocaust. Okay, well, what do they all have in common? They were both used as a sword against the nation of Israel as they were disobedient. Well, and then the last one is the kingdom of the Antichrist, okay, who will be the final kind of person on that. And under his kingdom, they will all turn back to, or many of them will turn back to the Lord. One of the things that Revelation tells us is that the Jews will finally recognize that they missed Messiah and will turn, maybe not all as a nation, but I mean a large number. A huge number of Jews will recognize that they missed it. Okay, so at that point, then God goes, I'm no longer going to punish you. I'm handing your punishment over to the ones who had oppressed you. And when you look at each of the examples I've given, up to and including Germany under Nazis, what ends up happening? They end up getting obliterated. So, I mean, they were the power for a little while. And then suddenly it just all fell apart. Well, that's part of this, and that's part of what it's getting. Okay, I know you're afflicted, Israel, and you're drunk not with wine, you're drunk with my wrath because you've been disobedient. Here's what I'm telling you. I'm not punishing you anymore. I'm done. I finished punishing you, and now I'm going to punish the ones who have oppressed you. It's time for my wrath to fall on them because they hurt my people. They may have been a tool for me to punish you for your disobedience, but they also hurt my people. And now they get punished. There is a reality in all of those that God turns them over to a nation. Okay, but that nation almost always goes too far. They're a sinful people and they continue in their sin. Well, when God is done punishing his people, then he punishes them for what they've done during that period of time as he redeems his people. He did it to Egypt, right? With the plagues and the crossing of the Red Sea. He punished them for their brutal treatment. He did it with Assyria. He did it with Babylon. He did it with the Persians. He did it with Greece. He did it with Rome. A foreign nation to punish Israel. But when that time of punishment is over, then he rescues them. And the cup of punishment he had placed on Israel is then moved to the nation that has been oppressing them. And that's what God is getting at. It's time now for me to free you from the punishment you've been under.
So what's happening to them now is the time of punishment?
Well, it's hard to say exactly. Okay? But let's look at details that are going on. Okay? In some ways, yes, but also in some ways, no. The Holocaust was certainly, and boy, people don't like it when you say this, but part of the Holocaust was God punishing Israel. Okay. But notice that it is not primarily, it's not only that. Because if not for, and let's make sure we remember when we say Holocaust, we are not only speaking of Germany. It's a double thing. Okay. You have and I'm going to phrase it this way. You have probably the two most wicked men to live in the modern age as rulers of two large countries at the same time, and both of them deciding that they really want to see if they can wipe the Jews off the map. You have Hitler and you have Stalin. And they were born about the same time. They lived about the same time. Stalin became leader of Russia. Hitler became leader of Germany, and they both decided to eradicate the Jews. Wasn't the only people they eradicated, but it was a primary one. It is because of that time period and the absolute wreckage that those two men laid that in 1948, the United Nations said, we think we need to give the Israel back their country, or at least part of it. Okay. From that point on, we've seen a lot of conflict in Israel. But have you noticed that since 1948, they've never lost? So in 1948, they come in, and then in 1967, they have a war with 3 nations, and they beat them in a week. And as part of that, they win back Jerusalem for the first time in their history since it fell. Okay. Now we see another major battle going on, and I'm going to be fair. This is me looking at it. I am not an expert, and I can't tell you exactly what's going to happen. But the nations that are suddenly becoming involved, okay, it started out with Syria, and it started out with the Palestinians and all of that. And then suddenly it moved from just Syria to Iran stepping in and trying to attack. And now we've countered against Iran. Well, there's a place in Ezekiel where it speaks of Syria, Iran, and Russia launching a major offensive against Israel. And as they are coming in and as they are launching this major offensive, God suddenly goes, nope, I'm done. And he wipes them out. And Israel's ready to fight, but they don't have to. They don't even have to mount up arms. God sends fire from heaven and just completely wipes out the army. And it even goes so far as to say the army was so big that the fuel and of course he's using the terms of the day. So the firewood and the fuel and all of that, there's so much of it that they're able to just use what they gather from the army God defeated, provides them 7 years worth of supplies. Is that where we're headed? I don't know. But what I can tell you is that there has never been a point since 1948 that you cannot point to Israel, even in their rebellion, and they are still in a lot of ways in rebellion. Okay. The vast majority of Jews are agnostic now. They just really don't believe God has anything really to do with their lives. Okay. You could go to a Jewish synagogue today and they will tell you that the Exodus didn't really happen. There are Jews in synagogue on a weekly basis who believe the Exodus isn't real. The Exodus didn't really happen.
Then why they keep going to synagogue?
Well, because it's tradition. They are national Jews. We're Jews, so we do this, but we really don't. God is capricious. We really can't count on him. That kind of idea. Okay. But yet at the same time, if we look at the last 50-something years, we have seen, in really more like 150 years, if we're really being honest, we have seen God move in the situation of Israel to bring them back into their land. By the way, you can make a case, and I would certainly say this is the truth. They are the only nation in all of human history that disappeared as a nation for 2,000 years and suddenly showed back up as a nation in the same place, with the same language, with the same culture. They were extinct for over 1,900 years. From, well, a little less than 1,900 years. From 70 AD, when Rome sacked the temple and destroyed Jerusalem, to 1948, there was no nation of Israel. They were a scattered people. And yet in 1948, they became a people again. They still had the same language, they still had the same culture, and they were actually back in the same place. Never, ever happened before. Well, why?
They do have Messianic Jews.
Yeah. They have what you would call a Messianic Jew. They still live by the Jewish dietary codes, but they have decided that they believe Jesus is the Messiah. Okay, and they follow Jesus. For a lot of years, they just became Christians, but now there is a movement to say, no, we're separate from that. We're Messianic Jews. Okay, mainly because what?
Norman, who runs a hotel, said he's
Messianic Jew.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. He believes Jesus is the Messiah, but he still tries to follow the Jewish culture.
I like talking to him.
Oh, yes. But here is the thing. So now watch. All of this is an example of the movement towards this place where God is saying, I am no longer punishing you. Your punishment time has ended. Yeah. All of this, and I'm going to say it this way as we finish. We'll finish here at the end of 51. But what I will say is this. All of this leads to the point of Christ's return. Okay, there are some things that had to happen before Christ returns. One of them was the Jews had to have Jerusalem again. And one Messianic Jew made a comment talking about history. And he brings up the fact that one of the primary elements of Jewish culture was the year of Jubilee, this 50-year cycle. Okay. In 1967, the Jews, for the first time ever, controlled Israel. Okay. Now, exactly 50 years before that, the British gained control of Jerusalem and Israel from the Ottomans. Okay. Exactly 50 years before that, there was a moment that looks very much like the discussion in Deuteronomy that said a wanderer would come and talk about how God had punished, how God had cursed them. And in 1867, so exactly 50 years, a guy by the name of Samuel Clemens, we know him as Mark Twain, wrote a pamphlet. He'd gone on a pilgrimage to Israel and said, it just looks like the land has been cursed by God. Okay. And so then when you look at 1967, you see the 6-Day War, the Jews gained control of Israel, Jerusalem again. But remember, for 50 years from that moment, the entire world said, no, we do not recognize that you control Jerusalem. Your capital is Tel Aviv. Your capital is this place. We do not recognize that you have control of Jerusalem and that Jerusalem is your capital or your holy city. You need to give it back. You need to give it back. You need to give it back.
Give it back to who?
Okay. Now, here's the funny thing. 50 years after the 6-Day War, we have a moment, and I will tell you, I'd have to look at exactly the dating, but it is exactly 50 years, like to the day, 50 years. Congress, under the Trump presidency, okay, made a decision that they were going to, for the first time, recognize that Jerusalem is the capital of Israel, and the U.S. moved their embassy to Jerusalem. Now, here's the pretty thing. When we talk about all the things that are going on, so in 1867 and 1917, the world's biggest power was Britain. And it's Britain that conquers Israel and takes it away from the Ottomans. In 2017, who is the world's greatest power? Well, it was the U.S. So what has happened? Well, for the first time in history since AD 70, when the world's greatest power of that time said, no, we're taking this away from you. For the first time, the world's greatest power has said, no, Jerusalem is your capital. Well, we know that and let's be fair, where does Christ return? Jerusalem. So that would indicate that now that it is under Jewish control, Jesus can come anytime. See, in fact, while we don't recognize it, that is one of the biggest things that has always been the sticking point in the whole Palestine-Israel thing. The Palestinians want the Mount of Olives.
But it's not theirs.
Well, but that's the
I
thing.
think it is.
They think it is. Okay? The Temple Mount
Yeah.
and the Mount of Olives, that whole area. Okay? Now, here's the kind of fun play in this. Where does the Bible say that Jesus will return? To the Mount of Olives. So what are they really fighting over? Well, the place Jesus is going to come back. In the somehow idea that, well, if we control that, then Jesus can't come back. Now, that's not how they would crouch it. They don't recognize that that's what it is, but that is a major element to that. Now, I'm not telling you that Jesus is coming back tomorrow. I don't know when. Okay. The Apostle Paul said, we think he could come back anytime. And that was 1900 years ago. But what I'm telling you is that the things that the Bible talks about that are evident that have to happen before Christ will return have happened. But what is going on? God is moving, and he is taking the children of Israel, and he's removing from them the punishment that they've been undergoing, and is now bringing them back to be his people once again. And it is a powerful idea to say that even in the midst of their punishment, God never abandoned them. And he will never abandon us either. All right, we'll stop there. Sorry, I hit a soapbox right at the end, or we'd have been done early.